So chances are you already know quite a bit about IGT if you're at this video, but in case you're new and you've never heard of IGT before, then I'm going to summarize it very quickly here. IGT stands for insufficient glandular tissue. Breasts are made up of two things, mostly fatty tissue and then also glandular tissue, which is where breast milk is made and stored during pregnancy. Glandular tissue develops during puberty and then also again during pregnancy in preparation for the baby. I will just add a little asterisk here and say that it doesn't matter about the size of your boobs. It could be that you have a lot of fatty tissue, which makes up the bulk of your breasts, but you could also have not very much glandular tissue, or you could have an average amount of glandular tissue, or a lot, and in which case you may experience the opposite of IGT, which is oversupply. IGT can't be helped with traditional lactation remedies like supplementation, herbs, pumping, or just practicing breastfeeding and baby and mum getting better at it. IGT can't be cured, but it can be supported. IGT is not particularly well known or particularly common, and therefore it's not really talked about very much because it's difficult to diagnose. My experience is not something that I've talked about before, which I was kind of surprised by. But I think by adding more experiences, more stories like mine to the collective voices, then I think we can get some proper support, and it's just good to talk stuff out sometimes and find people who've been through similar experiences to you. So my experience of puberty and boobs was very disappointing. I had a family of females who all seemed to be quite well endowed, and like most young girls I was quite excited to get my boobs, but they never really materialized, and what did come was very disappointing. I basically have never really needed a bra. Even though I insisted on wearing bras, I used to have like the silicone fillers and I used to pad it and stuff like that as I was more insecure as a teenager, and I've learned to accept it over the years. What can happen with IGT, and it's usually one of the biggest indicators, is that there is no or little change to the breasts during pregnancy. So when I was pregnant for the first time and I was 20, I was quite excited to get my pregnancy boobs, but they didn't really come either. Disappointing, but I didn't think much about it. I'm just going to quickly go through each of my breastfeeding journeys. I've had 3 so far and I'm planning a 4th right now. So when I was 20, I gave birth to my son Leo, who's now almost 15, which is crazy. And I didn't know that breastfeeding could be hard. I had only heard my mum's experience, which had been relatively easy. She had always had an abundant supply and had exclusively breastfed all of us without any trouble really. In fact, she used to talk about, more often than not, the troubles of having an oversupply and leaking everywhere and having a forceful letdown and such. But she never experienced any difficulties, and so I was naive and thought, well, breastfeeding is natural, so it's just going to come naturally and it's going to be easy, right? So Leo arrived and we started our breastfeeding journey. As the weeks went on, probably 2 or 3 weeks into his life, it just became apparent that despite feeding almost constantly and working so hard to try and breastfeed all the time, he really wasn't gaining enough weight, and the midwives were concerned. So we started introducing formula top-ups, which I was upset about, but more or less accepting. But I knew very little about breastfeeding at the time, and I didn't understand things like supply and demand. So I relied on formula too much, and I didn't know that I had to support my natural supply as well. And so quite quickly I ended up stopping breastfeeding and switching entirely over to bottle feeding, which I was so upset about. I was distraught. I felt absolutely heartbroken. And he was probably about 2 or 3 months by the time we started that. So from that point onwards, Leo was bottle fed with formula, and I can't say that I've noticed any particular, side effects from that. He's a great kid. Obviously, bottle feeding doesn't have an effect on your child long term. Sometimes it's just necessary. Fast forward 6 years and I give birth to my second son, Fox. and I was determined this time. I knew a lot more about breastfeeding, how it worked, what I needed to do, and I felt well prepared and educated. Fox spent a little while in the NICU when he was born, probably about a week, just due to some dehydration. So all the time that I wasn't with him, I was trying my best to express milk, and I was quite glad to see that with expressing, my milk supply was increasing. We got him home, and same story in the next few weeks, despite constant nursing and trying all of the things under the sun, you name it, supplements, tea, lactation cookies, a lactation consultant. I used an SNS, and we did use some top-ups as well. I was so anxious and so stressed out, and I tried everything, but Fox just wasn't gaining weight. So very reluctantly, we started to use formula more, but I knew more about maintaining my natural supply. I was pumping so much. I was trying to wake up in the middle of the night to do it, which wasn't sustainable. I really struggled with this because I couldn't believe that it was failing again. Nevertheless, I was determined, and we kept on breastfeeding and bottle feeding, which is called combination feeding. And we kept that up for more than a year. It wasn't 2 years, but it was well over a year, although I forget exactly how long. But I was really proud of myself that I continued breastfeeding in some capacity for well over a year with Fox. A little bit better, but not great. With Leo, I don't remember if I experienced any change in my breasts at all. It's so long ago, I can't remember. With Fox, I do remember that there was a change that eventually, after a while, I don't really remember how long, there was a change, and they were bigger and they would get full, and there would be milk there. My most recent breastfeeding journey started 2 years ago when I gave birth to my daughter Eden. Again, I was determined to give breastfeeding a go. I had a feeling that having cesarean sections was part of the problem, because sometimes cesarean sections can delay milk coming in postpartum. And I did try my best, my hardest, to avoid a C-section, but I did end up with another C-section. So I had to be content with whatever came next. I had refreshed my knowledge about breastfeeding. I'd read a couple more books. I felt quite well prepared. We had a few issues with Eden which we thought could be contributing to the breastfeeding journey not being as smooth sailing as I hoped. One of the things is that she had a tongue tie. So when she would cry, I could see that her tongue was kind of heart-shaped. So we did go and we got that clipped. That was like one of the hardest things I've ever done. And honestly, she was fine. She was fine. She cried for like all of a second, and then we put her to the breast, but it was me. I was a wreck. I was crying. I was like, I could not believe that I was willingly letting someone do this to my baby, which ultimately wasn't even that big of a procedure, and she won't remember it. But we thought maybe her tongue tie was preventing a good latch, because I was also experiencing a lot of pain. The pain didn't really get any better. She seemed to have a bit of a poor time latching, but we did persevere, we did try, and we were nursing all the time. My poor babies, each of them, they would get so tired trying that they would fall asleep on the breast often, and I'd have to wake them up and try again. And we were using little top-ups here and there, but again, I was just absolutely devastated to learn that Eden was not gaining weight, and within a few weeks, we were pretty frequently using top-ups to help her get her weight up and be satiated. This was so heartbreaking. Eden was kind of like my redemption story, having been a rainbow baby and a return to breastfeeding, which is not something I'd ever thought I'd get to do again. So I had put a lot of pressure on myself to try and get it right. I was inconsolable one day. There was this one time where Eden was weighed and we were told that she had gone over her birth weight, which I found hard to believe, but I kind of was like, okay. And then it turned out to be a mistake, and that actually in a whole week she'd only gained about 10 grams. So that was really dispiriting, and I was so upset. But just like Fox, we started to use top-ups and formula, but but I also just kept breastfeeding at the same time wherever I could. And there was definitely a change. I was definitely filling out the nursing bras that I had, and they were getting, my breasts were getting full from milk if I didn't feed her for a few hours and stuff. We're still breastfeeding now, and she's almost 2. She'll be 2 in the beginning of March, and although I don't actually produce much milk anymore, she still really enjoys the breastfeeding, and she uses it for comfort, and she will still ask for it. So we are just continuing for now, despite the fact that I'm pregnant again, and these are way too sensitive and it hurts like hell, but I do it for her. So what were my biggest clues that made me think perhaps I had IGT and not just low milk supply? One of the biggest clues that I have is that my breasts did not change much throughout pregnancy, and then even when I delivered the babies, I wouldn't ever get that feeling that moms would talk about of the milk coming in, where they'd wake up maybe like 3 or 4 days postpartum and their boobs would just be so full and so tender and filled with milk and engorged and just, you know, exploding with milk, basically. I've never had that feeling postpartum. It's always been far more gradual, that it's been difficult and then sort of it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier, but it's never quite been enough for any of my babies. So that was my first big clue. I had already had my suspicions with Fox because it wasn't going well, and it was the first time that I'd actually come across the term IGT. Editing, and I wanted to just add in a little extra note that I've remembered, and I'm gonna have to preface this with a little bit of a content warning. I am going to be talking about pregnancy loss. So in 2018 I lost a pregnancy very late. I was 26 weeks and I had stopped feeling my baby move. And when I went to go and get investigated, it transpired that my baby had passed away. And I gave birth to him. And then after I gave birth, I was offered medication that would prevent my milk from coming in. And I refused it because at the time, Fox was still so young. I was actually still breastfeeding him. And I said, you know, it's not a problem. I'm still breastfeeding. I don't want my milk to dry up, so I'm gonna pass. That never happened. I never felt like I had an increase in milk because I'd given birth. So that's just another instance of where I do not experience milk coming in postpartum, which is probably a very big indicator of IGT. My second biggest clue is that my babies just really failed to gain weight within the first weeks of their lives, to the point where they were in danger of failure to thrive. So I really had to put my own feelings aside and start formula feeding because my babies needed it. As much as that hurt my ego, I had to do it, and you know, fed is best. Although my breasts never really developed during pregnancy, they never really developed very much during puberty either. I have always had small breasts, asterisk, breast size doesn't matter, but I have very little fat tissue on my breasts, and I also have probably insufficient glandular tissue as well. Given the fact that I have not really grown to an average size and that I also have a few other anomalies to do with my genetics, it makes sense to me that I might experience some additional problems that could not be foreseen, such as IGT. I'm pregnant again and I'm planning a 4th breastfeeding journey, so what am I going to do this time? This time I am far more accepting of the fact that I'm going to need to combination feed. My intention is to go to the hospital with milk available, formula available. I know the hospital can give you some, but I would rather just have my own personal stash. I am considering using an SNS again, which is a supplemental nursing system. It's basically a way of giving formula at the same time as having the baby at the breast. So a very small thin tube goes from a reservoir of formula and it goes into the baby's mouth alongside the nipple. And that allows the baby to get nutrition, but also stimulates the breast and keeps the breastfeeding bond alive. So I'm considering, using an SNS again. It was a bit fiddly before and I didn't really get along with it, but there are lots of new models available on the market now, and I'm just willing to try again using my experience from before as what not to do. So I'm definitely going to do that. And in general, I'm putting way less pressure on myself to breastfeed exclusively. I am already going into this knowing that it's going to be hard for me. And if it isn't, that's a pleasant surprise, but I am just going to combination feed, and that is how we're going to do it. So with IGT, there is a possibility that it can get easier with each pregnancy. There is a suggestion that perhaps with each pregnancy, your breasts develop new glandular tissue that can then be used for subsequent pregnancies. I don't know if that has been the case for me, because I've had so long between pregnancies that I'm not really sure. I do think that it became easier each time, but that may have just been because I knew more about how it all worked, and also I think that my acceptance made it easier for me too, that this is just how it is for me and that's okay. My boobs have remained kind of bigger than they were pre-baby, but I am still breastfeeding in some capacity with Eden, and I'm going to have a very short gap, if at all. I may have no gap between breastfeeding her and this new one in June. So it's possible that my breasts might just be kind of they've already got the memo, the factory is already open, so maybe this will just naturally flow into having a better supply, but I'm not pinning my hopes on it. I'm not getting my hopes up, but we'll see. This is the shortest gap I've ever had between breastfeeding journeys. It might be different. I do think that they have got slightly bigger during this pregnancy, and I'm fairly sure they got a little bit bigger during my pregnancy with Eden, but I don't remember with Fox. And I don't think anything changed during Leo's. I noticed that my breasts were getting smaller because I was not feeding as much, but I think having become pregnant again, they have increased a little bit again, so we'll see. I'll be chatting about this in a few months' time when the baby's here. Now, I just want to offer a few words of reassurance, wisdom to you who may be struggling to feed your baby. It's okay to mourn the loss of the breastfeeding journey you didn't get to have. It's okay. Let those feelings come and process them, and still know that you can bottle feed your baby and they will still look into your eyes. And one of my favorite things that Eden does still is she fiddles with my hair, and we still have a lovely time. Bottle feeding your baby is totally possible to be as intimate as breastfeeding, and you didn't fail, this is just one of those things, and I'm sorry that it's happening. I know that it's hard, but you will be okay. And ultimately, it is your choice. And no matter how you choose to feed your baby or for how long you choose to breastfeed, it's all valid and it's all okay. So I'm sending you lots of love, Mama, if this is you. And my comments and my DMs on Instagram and stuff are open for anyone who wants to message me. I think that pretty much sums up my breastfeeding journey with IGT. I hope this has been useful to somebody, and I will be back with another video really soon. Bye!